My name is Matt Wasson. I had the privilege of knowing and working with and being very good friends with Lenny since 2001. And there's many others here who are going to speak to his life and his legacy. And I want to speak a little bit about how this came about, this celebration here today. And it's part of what we, I guess we're calling informally the Red Stripe Conspiracy, which is basically a ragtag band of self-appointed protectors of Lenny's legacy and dignity. And the people that have been part of this are at the risk of leaving some names out, I do want to mention some names, and especially I want to mention Teresa Lee over there in the blue sweater, who orchestrated the events that you see today, and some of the things that are I hope people will take the time to look at some of this layout. Teresa had much help from Jerry Cantwell and Kevin Balling and others in pulling this together, but everything from his vest and other vestments to the infamous green Crocs, which he inevitably wore with socks, as everyone knows. The green Crocs, yes, please. So, how this came about, Lenny had something he called the birthday, or I called the birthday party model of organizing. Lenny would tell it often. He'd go around the country and and people would ask him, he'd inspire people to do something about the Arctic or about mountaintop removal, and they'd say, well, I don't know anything about organizing. What can I do? And Lenny's would respond to that with a question, which was, have you ever put on a birthday party? And inevitably they'd say, yeah, well, and he'd say, well, you know how to organize. And so for a bunch of people who know nothing about how to put together a funeral, we simply applied the birthday party model of organizing to this. And here we are. So it's for those of us who were on the Red Stripe committee, or Red Stripe Conspiracy, some of the greatest joys are that Georgia, his sister, and Leslie, his daughter, were able to make it out today. It really made for those who don't know, they had not spoken in many, many years, decades, and I think it's a testament to the effectiveness of the organizing, but also their love and steadfastness to be here. And Lucy Beach, who made it all the way down from Alaska, and it's would have meant the world to Lenny to have you here. I also want to briefly take advantage of my position as the welcoming committee to say a couple of my own remarks, or as Lenny might have said, if it cooks up, shoot it. And I guess what I want to talk about is, if you haven't seen the T-shirts, what the T-shirts say is, it has a picture of Lenny and it says, "Do it in a good way." For those who don't know the story behind that, when Lenny first realized that he really had to do something about what was happening in the Arctic refuge, he had put a slideshow together. He said he was up in Old Crow in the Yukon, and went to a group of the elders and said, how do I do this? How do I go out and organize the country around this? And, he was looking for, probably some fairly detailed advice about how to run a campaign. And he got exactly a one sentence answer, which was, do it in a good way. And Lenny told that story many times. But for those of us who had the privilege of working with Lenny, that really does encapsulate a lot of what we learned from him. Lenny's message was, always get outside of yourself, go to where people are at, and never needlessly make enemies. And he would talk about how anyone who works for justice has a certain a bit of magic, and our job is to go out and give that magic away and not keep it to ourselves, because if you give it away, more magic always comes back. And a lot of the people who are going to be speaking here, and a lot of the people who are here today, are part of that legacy. You know, Lenny wanted to write a book, and I think Do It in a Good Way would have been one of the titles of the chapters. And those of us who ever tried to get Lenny to write even a paragraph never really were thinking that the book was going to materialize. However, as I told Lenny many times, Lenny, we are your book. We are your living, breathing book. And the title of that book is Do It in a Good Way. So for those we're going to have a number of folks speaking. I'm not going to come up and introduce them one by one. So if folks who are speaking, if you could have a schedule and come up when the appointed time is there, and then we'll have a sort of an open mic a little bit later for anyone else who wants to say a piece to have that opportunity. So next, Maeve Gould and Molly Moore are going to give us a Jewish mourner's Kaddish.
So the Kaddish is a Jewish prayer of mourning that's traditionally read at Jewish funerals and memorials. Molly and I were lucky enough to talk with Lenny on many occasions about Judaism and Jewish culture. And in fact, I believe his grandfather was a rabbi, and Judaism was a large part of his life, especially in his earlier years. Molly and I went out to his house to hang out with him just 2 weeks before he passed away, and he called it, jokingly, the first meeting of the Jews and Todd. So the Hebrew isn't printed in the program, but the transliteration is. And I'm going to read the Hebrew, and then Molly's going to read the English translation. And this is for Lenny, or Aryeh Leib, which was his Hebrew name, I was told, and that translates to loved lion. The Kaddish is on the back of the program, just so you know. Yitgadal v'yitkadash me rabbah, ve'alma divra kirite v'amlich malchute, v'he'ekon uv'mekon uv'ha'yeh dekol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'yemru amen. Yehe shmei rabbah mivarach le'olam ul me'omaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yithileh v'yitholel, shmei dekudashah brichu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nehemata, damiran b'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'hayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mermav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
And you all can join me on the amens on the English transliteration. Let the glory of God be exalted, and his great name be hallowed in the world whose creation he willed. May his kingdom soon prevail in our own day, in our own lives, and the life of all Israel. And let us say, Amen. Let his great name be blessed forever and ever. Let the name of the Holy One, blessed is he, be glorified, exalted, and honored. Though he is beyond all the praises, songs, and adorations that we can utter, let us say, Amen. Amen. For us and for all Israel, may the blessing of peace and the promise of life come true, and let us say, Amen. May he who causes peace to reign in the high heavens, let peace descend on us, on all Israel, and all the world, and let us say, Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved. Amen.
I just have a poem to offer. It's short, like me and Lenny. The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water. And I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
Hello, I'm Harvard Ayers. I've known Lenny for about 25 years, I guess, and he's still a super great friend and certainly a mentor. Teresa was talking about they're both being altitudinally challenged, and I just wanted to say a Lennyism. He said, you know what? I may be small, but I am quick. I call this a tribute to Lenny forever. My Lenny stories are partly from my memory of the events in our lives as partners and partly from Lenny's interview that he did for the book, Arctic Gardens, Voices from an Abundant Land by Landon Pennington, Dave Harmon, and myself in 2010. First time I ever met Lenny Kohm was at the Sierra Club board meeting in San Francisco in 1989. He presented a slideshow, not yet the totally polished version of the legendary Last Great Wilderness. His presentation about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge coastal plain was of particular interest to me because as an anthropologist, I have a strong environmental conscience and was organizing a Sierra Club issue committee, which we call the Native American Sites Committee. Lenny, with his strong Native American interest involved with the very significant environmental issue, was clearly coincident with the things I had in mind for the Sites Committee. I can only hope that Lenny did not feel overwhelmed when I was the first one to corner him after his slideshow to the board of directors. One thing led to another with our conversation, and the thing I most remember was making an offer to Lenny that he did not refuse. I told Lenny, I said, Lenny, I bet you will not be a part of the first ever meeting of the Sites Committee board. And I told him that I bet him a plane flight to Albuquerque that he wouldn't come. I lost. He took the free airlines ticket and was a stalwart member of the Native American Sites Committee for the duration. Lenny related a story to me in our conversation after the Sierra Club slideshow. He said that he was a photographer by trade, and he became so after 6 to 8 years as a professional percussionist or drummer. Before getting to the photographer story, Lenny had a great explanation of why he quit drumming. Some of you have heard these things. These are Lennyisms, and we ought to do a dictionary. We really should. He actually had significant success as a drummer, but he got the 7 years drummer's itch. After a bit of career study and contemplation, Lenny came to a very disturbing conclusion that he was probably about the 238th best drummer in the world. And that did not work for him. He was really unsatisfied. He figured that he was about as good as he could get at that point in life, and there are many fine folks simply more talented. Goodbye, drumming. Hello, photography. So Lenny, at the age of about 40, set his sights on being a really good photographer and something that he admired from afar through his previous life. He did mainly freelance photography And in 1987, he got a chance to travel on an assignment that would have him photographing the Dawson, Yukon discovery days of the Klondike Gold Rush fame of the late 1800s, early 1900s. It sounded exciting, and he jumped at the chance. It was in Dawson that he met some native people from Old Crow, Yukon, of course, and they were at the laundry, and they told him about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and how important it was to them. He was so taken by their story that he shortly thereafter set his sights on going up to this place. He found a couple of pilots that were going up that way, and they were able to drop him off in the coastal plain with a couple of other people, by the way. He found that this place was not all ice like he'd been told, but rather was beautiful and wild. Lenny realized for the first time that he was actually a part of an ecosystem, and a bear had something to do with this. Now Lenny is speaking, and I'll quote from his interview at times. The first time I saw a bear, it was just myself and this grizzly standing maybe a couple of 100 feet from each other. Right then and there, I had the realization that I may not be at the top of the food chain. On the way back in the bush plane, the pilot stopped at a native Gwich'in community called Arctic Village, Alaska. There was a U.S. congressional delegation in the village to hear the native side of an attempt by the petroleum industry to open the Arctic refuge to oil and gas drilling, and Lenny got to watch the hearing. After 18 minutes from the time it started, an elder was making a speech in Gwich'in, and that speech was about half translated. The chair of the delegation said that they were sorry, but they had to leave now to get back to Fairbanks where they were expected. Lenny's words. A 30,000-year-old culture had 18 minutes to defend itself. I could distinctly remember sitting there thinking that 500 years ago, Cortez and Pizarro swept across Central and South America and wiped out the Inca and the Aztecs because they wanted the gold. Then 150 years ago, we swept across the Great Plains and slaughtered the buffalo because we needed the land. And now, in 1987, we're getting ready to do it again because we need the oil. With that realization, really an epiphany, Lenny asked an elder from Old Crow if he could take a picture of her. She said, of course, but you probably will leave just like all the rest, and I'll never see you again. But if you really cared about us, you would come to Old Crow and find out why we are all so concerned about the Arctic refuge. Long story short, within a couple of days, Lenny was in Old Crow. He was viewed by the community citizens like any other photographer with the little short guy with 3 cameras hanging around his neck. But he stayed 10 days, all the time talking to the people, the folks there living in Old Crow. Lenny was in love. He was in love, and not with drumming or photography, but with the native people and their issue. Jump ahead to a trip back to California. He had to get back home after this junket. Lenny got back to his car, which was on the Dempster Highway to the west there, or to the east, and began his long journey home. He didn't talk to anyone much in the whole 2,000-mile trip. He was in deep thought. He didn't know what it meant, but he came to the conclusion on that trip that he was going to do everything that one person could do to protect the people and the Arctic. The Gwich'in call this place the place where life begins because it's the birthing grounds of the caribou, the porcupine caribou herd. At this point, I'm going to leave the day-by-day story of Lenny's second love after music, which was to dominate his life for much of his remaining 27 years on this earth. I want to simply say that Lenny started almost from scratch as an environmentalist. But over the next few years, he became a phenomenon as an environmental organizer. But But what made him so special and such an exemplary activist was his love for the human beings whose culture was in danger, just as was their beloved refuge and their animal brothers, the caribou. So a few more Lennyisms that some of us Lenny boos. Anybody ever heard that term, Lenny boo? You know what a boo is? Anybody? Caribou. So I call him, some of us Lenny boos, will no doubt recognize. As an anthropologist, I have to love this one. Here, here. On this second trip up to Old Crow, Lenny was surprised when one man named Stanley Njutli, who was sort of ho-hum about Lenny when he visited the first time, but on the second, he charged out of his house, ran up and pell-mell and gave Lenny this huge hug. And he's a pretty good-sized guy, too, so it was, whoa, Lenny thought. So just before he left Old Crow on that second trip, he had a burning question for Stanley. He said, Stanley, and this is Lenny, Stanley, I got to ask you last year when I was here, you wouldn't even give me the time of day. And now this year we have become really good friends. Why? Stanley said, you came back. That's an important lesson, I think, for anthropologists and everybody that works with any human beings. Now for one of Lenny's favorite war stories, aka lobbying tales. It begins with Lenny talking about his dozen years with the Last Great Wilderness slideshow. Lenny says, concerning having a native person with me or not, I think it's night and day. One thing that was really important was just having a native person there. It really didn't matter what they said. There were some people who were with me who would just freeze up some of the native people. So I would pick some stupid thing to say and sort of change the attention of the audience. But just the fact that they were there, I think, had a tremendous impact. He went on to say that the native person was a press magnet. This guy from North Carolina, and he's talking about himself, here in Detroit, didn't get much attention. But with a native person, the press came in droves to the lobby trip. One day, several other lobbyists and Lenny were to meet with a very important congressman from Maryland who held an important committee position. There was Lenny, two environmentalists, and an Old Crow Gwich'in woman named Glenna Frost. After the two environmentalists gave their spiels, which were received politely by the congressman, Lenny knew it was Glenna's turn. Here is Lenny again. My job was to get Glenna there on time. All of us were there to hear what Glenna had to say. After the hearing some of the words of her words, the congressman said, well, you're definitely passionate and it's definitely a very compelling argument. But just last week, there were two Inupiat Eskimo women who also gave very compelling and passionate pleas for drilling. So I'm curious, if those women were sitting right here now, what would you say to them? What would you ask them? I realized at that moment that our whole effort depended on Glenna's answer. She stopped for a minute and thought about it and said, I would ask them, when your children come to you and ask who they are and where they came from, what are you going to tell them? Time froze. Everything stopped. It was almost like if you had been pouring a glass of water. You could see the water in midair. I look over at the activist leader and there were tears running down his cheeks. I look at the Washington lobbyist and their tears were running down his face. Glenna was sobbing uncontrollably by this point. I looked at Congressman Gilchrist and there were tears running down both cheeks. The first thing he did was to run inside of his private bathroom, and very shortly thereafter, he brought a towel for Glenna to dry her eyes. He came back out, she calmed down, and he put his arm around her and said, As long as I am in Congress, I won't let anything happen to where you live or the people you love. Hard to top that one. That exchange was emblematic of who and what Lenny was about, and of course, what Glenna was about as well. Going back for a moment, shortly after I met Lenny in San Francisco, he came to Boone, came here to do the Last Great Wilderness slideshow. On that trip, he met a lady who turned out to be his scheduler and frequent road companion for about 2 years, Jeannie Igo. Is Jeannie with us today? Did she get out here?
Son's birthday.
Oh, okay. I understand. I'm sure she wanted to be here. She was a young woman at that time who was in school here at ASU. Lenny loved Boone at first sight, and very shortly thereafter, he called me with the news. He was moving here from California. Lenny was still on the road much of the time for his first 10 years or so. One Lenny Road story, and I'll finish up. Actually, 2 stories, the Baptist minister says. Lenny always, for those first years, had an old, full-size sedan, which he drove everywhere. It didn't look much, but it got from place to place. One time when Lenny and I were talking here in Boone, I happened to see a nice-looking, slightly smaller but much newer sedan. I said, "Lenny, what if we could buy you that newer car? And you could be safer and not break down." To which Lenny replied, "Not a bad idea. Just give me a sledgehammer and a few minutes and it would be just about right." And finally, over those first couple years, Lenny had very little financial support, shall we say. He raised a little around Boone and everywhere, but he more or less got most of it from passing the hat around at his presentations. But on more than one occasion, he called me, and somehow I'd scrape up enough to get him down the line, and he'd get some more money the next night. I remember one Louisiana trip, and he called me with the equivalent of, "Busted fat in Baton Rouge, looking for the train." Anyway, get the idea. Fortunately, there was this nice New York lady named Ellen who helped us out several times, and she wired him $1,000, and he was several more weeks before he had to be worried. Lenny's success was phenomenal on the road. He was very strategic, going to congressional districts that had legislators who were on the right committees to help save the refuge. And he would do a Last Great Wilderness program and then ask the folks in the audience to write letters. Sometimes they'd write them right after the event. The second year Lenny was on the road, 23 Congress people whose congressional districts he visited signed on as co-sponsors of H.R. 36, the Arctic Coastal Plain Wilderness Bill. Several big greens like the Sierra Club were also working in the field trying to get folks to sign on. There was one new co-signer that year whose district Lenny did not visit. So the score that year was Lenny 23, the other environmental groups 1. But around the year 2000, Lenny was running into a wall. Road trips like he did are not for everyone, and his dozen-year stint was amazing. About this time, Lenny was trying to decide whether to hang it up. I had told him he would have a job at Appalachian Voices anytime he wanted it, so he planned a big blowout for his exodus from the Last Great Wilderness road trips. He called it the Bon Voyage River Trip. And I know there are several people. How many hands? Show me hands. How many went on that trip? Come on, Matt. Several. Was that a different one? Oh, okay. So there was more than one Lenny trip. Sorry. And he picked the Idaho Salmon River. Was it the Salmon River that you guys went on? That was Lenny. Yeah. Okay. 3 rafts and 20-some people participated. Really a who's who in the U.S.-wide wilderness protection efforts across the organizational spectrum. Over the next dozen years, Lenny worked for Appalachian Voices, and at first was mainly concerned with smokestack air pollution in general. Even before joining App Voices, he helped to mastermind the passage of the NC Clean Smokestacks Act, passed in 2002. It is, to this day, looked at as one of the most successful smokestack bills. Finally, shortly after the passage of that bill, Lenny got the fever, MTR fever, that is. I'll never forget when I presented to Lenny the idea of the mammoth destruction of this mountain-killing coal technique. He said, "Hey, Harvard, would it help if I took a 4-day trip up to West Virginia and checked this thing out?" A few days later, he was on his way from Boone to Whitesville, West Virginia, the heart of the southern West Virginia coal fields. After 2 days, Lenny called me. He told me, he said he was on his way back home. He was completely overwhelmed with the incredible damage to the West Virginia mountains and its people. He told me he couldn't take any more. It was, in Lenny's words, the most intractable environmental destruction he had ever conceived. Very long story short, Lenny was within a year organizing Washington Weeks for App Voices to fight MTR, taking particular care to make sure that the mountain people of West Virginia, those who suffer directly from the dust, polluted water, in some cases no water, and crumbling house foundations. And he wanted to make sure those people were up front with the Congress and people there that had their firsthand experiences were by far the most important. Over these years, much has been done to make the Congress aware of this intractable situation, but due to 8 years of George Bush and the current intractable Congress, Lenny's efforts, while as powerful as they could be under the circumstances, his clean water bill in the coal fields hasn't really passed. Yet, you know what we need? We need another Lenny. That's what we need. Finally, and this is truthfully the last. Finally, I must relate my correspondence I had with Lenny, my very last. While recent years has found us headed in different directions, I still consider Lenny my environmental mentor and sage advisor. A couple months ago, Lenny emailed me a response to an email I sent him. My email was to a close friend. His name is Tom Weiss. He works on the Keystone XL pipeline a great deal. And Lenny. Tom knows Lenny very well. Tom, this is my email. Tom, I second your relaxation period. You remind me a bit of a friend, Lenny Kohm, after he had spent about 10 successful years on the road showing his Arctic National Wildlife Refuge slideshow. If there's one person responsible for the Arctic Refuge being unscathed by the oily, it's clearly Lenny. He just stopped his Arctic work cold turkey and took on something perhaps less taxing. He was truly burned out. I'm not saying that you, Tom, are burned out, but I realize how this sort of thing can take its toll. Don't rush it. Sounds cliche, but best I can tell it's true. Harvard. Now Lenny's email to the two of us. Short and sweet. Thanks to both of you for your kind words and mostly for the essential work that you both do. I am proud to call both of you my close friend. I can't think of a better compliment. Thank you.
A friend of Lenny's from Silver Spring, Maryland. I came down yesterday with my wife Cindy and my friend Chris. We had a wonderful drive through the fall weather. 8 hours. It was great. It was absolutely fabulous. And we got in about midnight, so I may not be in perfect harmony, but I'm absolutely grateful to be surrounded by so many friends and favorites of Lenny. He picked his friends very carefully. Although from the volume, it doesn't look like that, does it? But he did. So I'm really grateful to Harvard for going first. because Harvard explained everything, and I'm not going to explain a damn thing. So welcome to the Irish part of the evening. You've all heard of Django Unchained. This is Lenny Unexplained. So it turns out that there is no explanation for Lenny, at least not to satisfy a philosopher or an inquiring mind. He would have wanted it that way. A bearded jazz drummer who played with Jimmy and with Cal Jader, and then found his heart in the of Gwich'in snares on the Porcupine River in Old Crow, Canada, who found bliss on the shores of the Arctic, forsook his drumsticks for a camera, and found soul anyway. A Jewish leprechaun who charmed the Gwich'in elders behind a veil of smoke. How are we going to win like that, Lenny? Who danced in Bahia with Grandma's Gone Wild. There are pictures to prove this. And Captain America, who became an organizer driven by love for the land of the caribou, who then became a mountain man and the voice of the untopped Appalachians, of the creeks and the hollows, who found bliss again on the shores of Jamaica, still going strong at 70, who was my daughter's Uncle Lenny. Caipirinha man, the one who drank all my single malt every damn time. We're talking some serious ganja trying to explain Lenny. Maybe a block of hash as big as a car. And we still might not find the answer. Are you going to serenade us? And I said, no, I'm not. I'm going to play a Requiem. And a Requiem is not fall into the category of entertainment. Requiem is, the purpose is to do three things. Sorry. To recall our grief, to acknowledge the power of death, and to celebrate the spirit, Lenny's spirit. So it might take me a second to get ready, but this is called, there's one more note. So you may not know that in addition to playing with the greats, Lenny played with the Captain Beefheart Band for several months, something that he tried to keep secret for a while. But Captain Beefheart had a playful band, and they gave Lenny an indelible nickname. They called him Drumbo Bang'em. So this is a Requiem for Drumbo Bang'em.
I was director of Appalachian Voices for many years while Lenny was there, and I wish you all could take turns standing up here and look at who is in this room. It's really, I actually cannot remember another time in my life when I've been in the midst of so many incredible people all in one place, and it's such a testament to Lenny, and so is that song. And you know, Lenny was a man of the people, but when it came to music, we all know he was kind of a snob, and and I think he would have loved that song. I think it would have passed his test. Dan and I, my wonderful husband Dan and I, were driving down here reflecting on a lot of things about Lenny, including his really classic and timeless sense of fashion. I had already packed, and so I brought this to wear, but we were thinking it might have been more appropriate if I would have come here with some plastic pants with a piece of duct tape on the butt, holding them closed, some Crocs, a little zip-up fleece. But when I got the news about Lenny, I was doing what he had taught me to do. I was with Anna Jane Joyner, and we were in Atlanta, and we were essentially doing a slideshow. We were doing a screening of the Years of Living Dangerously episode we were in, and we were out there, and Lenny would say, stir in the pot. This is what Lenny would say, you got to get out there and stir the pot. And we were just out there stirring the pot, talking to people. And I've been thinking about Lenny a lot since that evening. And I've been realizing how much of my work is rooted in things I've learned from Lenny, and all these things I say are me saying things that Lenny used to say that I now say to other people. And so I've decided there are at least 5 Lennys that I came to know. I'm sure many of you know, so I'm going to share the 5 Lennys with you. The first was Lenny, the outdoor adventurer. The first time I met Lenny was on the Porcupine River. I was in Montana at the time, and Thanna and I had finagled our way onto this Porcupine River trip. And before we left, Lenny called me up, and he was giving me all these tips about what to bring and what it would be like. And I only later, like many years later, did he tell me he was actually not calling me to be helpful. He was calling to interview me and see if I was cool enough to get to actually go on this trip, because it was me and 5 rather salty guys, and they just wanted to be sure I was going to be fun enough to make the cut to go on this trip. And Thanna was actually telling me in the car that our mutual friend Jake Krylik, who is the one who got us onto this trip, said, so Lenny is the guy I know who's setting this up, and have you ever met Lenny? And we hadn't, but Thanna was like, well, you know, maybe, I'm not sure. He's like, oh, no. If you would have ever met Lenny, you'd remember. Because he's basically a gnome. He's basically like an environmental gnome. And that's been cracking me up ever since Than told me that. So I met him on the Porcupine. A lot of us celebrated Lenny's life with him on the Salmon River, Lenny Stock, which was an epic adventure that we all took Lenny on about, 10 years ago or something to thank him and appreciate him. That was how a lot of us knew Lenny the outdoor adventurer. There's also, as we have heard, a lot about Lenny the artist. And we all know his beautiful photography. We've heard about his musical career going to one of the best music schools in the world, Berklee School of Music in Boston, studying drums, playing with Jimi Hendrix, playing with the great musicians of San Francisco in the late 60s. And I feel like Lenny brought that musicality and that spirit of an artist into everything that he did. I think that was part of why he connected heart to heart with people and why he felt like that was such an important part of our work. Part of Lenny's artistic history you may not know about, that he told me many years after knowing him, was that he was, for a while, I believe, a professional ballet dancer. Does anybody else know this about Lenny? He had some girlfriend in New York, and she was a ballerina, and there were never enough dudes to dance. And so he started taking ballet lessons, and he had this stint in the 70s in New York when he was like a professional ballet dancer. So, or some kind of, dancer in tight clothes and what have you. So Lenny the artist. And then there's Lenny the activist. Lenny that many of us knew. And I think Lenny shunned the spotlight for himself. He didn't like to draw a lot of attention to his own accomplishments, his own contributions. And I just want to be sure we're all saying for the record today that Lenny was one of the most brilliant and strategic activists out there on the planet. And he wasn't out there waving it around like a big flag, but he was. And, his method was you start with the things people love. You don't start by showing people a picture of a blown up mountain. You start by showing people a picture of these beautiful mountains out here and playing the music from Appalachia and hearing about the rich culture. And then you show them the picture of the blown up mountain. Then after you remind people about what they love, then you show them what the threat is. And you do that with a human face, with a human story, by telling the story of a person who's been affected, because that's what's going to move people. It's what they love, and it's that connection to a fellow human being. And then you let them know what they can do wherever they are, if you can throw a birthday party. And you have to do that by physically getting out there and talking to people and looking them in the eye. And I remember when I saw An Inconvenient Truth, and I watched it, and then the Al Gore movie about climate change, and I watched it, and I went home, and I suddenly had this realization. I thought, okay, here's this guy. He was the vice president. He almost became the president. He probably has more money and connections and power than anybody in the world, and he is not elected president, or if he is, but doesn't get to be the president. And so what is he? So then the world is his oyster. He can do whatever he wants. And what does he do? He goes out and he gives a slideshow. Goes out and gives a slideshow. There's no shortcut to that. There's no shortcut to going with people where they are and connecting with them person to person, one at a time. And that was what Lenny taught everybody here who's in this room. Fourth Lenny, the outdoor adventurer, the artist, and the activist, was Lenny the wingman. If I was inaugurating a Wingman Hall of Fame, Lenny would be my first nominee. If you were at a party or a conference or some sort of hippie gathering or out at the bar, you wanted to have Lenny there with you. When Lenny walked in the room, you were so happy to see him. When Lenny left the party, you were sad. And you knew that if Lenny was there, you were going to have a better time. And Lenny's ability to have a good time was one of my favorite things about him. Actually, just seeing Brooks, I probably shouldn't share this with y'all because it's very embarrassing, but I think the last time I saw Brooks, Lenny had taken me over to his house for dinner, and and I'm a big fan of bourbon, and so Brooks had said, well, do you like rye whiskey? And I was like, oh, well, I haven't really had it that often. He was like, let's do a flight of rye whiskey. We're going to do like a tasting. And I woke up the next morning in Brooks's guest room with Lenny, my wingman, never leaving my side. So you might get into a little trouble with Lenny, but he would not leave you behind. And then lastly was Lenny the teacher and Lenny the mentor. And just looking around this room, especially at all my former colleagues from Appalachian Voices, and I feel like we were all kind of hand-picked by Lenny and taught and trained. And he really, I realize now that he's gone, which is often the way this is, that he's really is one of the most important mentors that I have had in my life. And just a couple more Lennyisms to add to the list. One of the things Lenny always said when you started a campaign was one of the first things you needed to do was pick your committee to plan the victory party. And Lenny was serious about that because you are taking on this David and Goliath fight. You are taking on this impossible mission, and you had to go in it with this full intention and this full conviction that you were going to win, even if it seemed impossible. And if you didn't go into it with that kind of conviction, then you shouldn't do it, because that's the kind of mindset that it would take to win these battles. Another Lennyism, we're all working on these intractable issues of, mountaintop removal and the Arctic refuge and energy and climate that have been around forever, and we can lament, why didn't we do this 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And Lenny would always say the second best time is now. And of all the things that I repeat that I learned from Lenny, that's probably the one I say perhaps daily. But one of the things I say most often. He saw the potential in every single person to change the world. He really deeply believed. He had a saying that he would be very dismissive of the likes of Dr. Wasson over there by calling us registered certified smart people. And he said, you didn't need to be a registered, certified, smart person to make it. Although he loved us, but, kept us in our place. You didn't have to be a registered, certified, smart person to change the world. Every single person had within them this power and this potential to change the world, and connecting them with that was what Lenny was so good at. And I think the people in this room are a testament to that. And then lastly, if you want to know if Lenny had any advice about love, he did. It was very good. When Than and I got engaged, he said, look, there's only one thing you need to know about love. Simple. Keep your woman warm. And it's actually really, really good advice, I'm telling you. 20 years later, we're still together, and that's one of the reasons why, I'll just tell you. So just finally, Lenny was one of my greatest friends I've ever had. And I know he was a great friend to many of you in the room. He went from being a colleague to a friend to part of the family. My daughter also called Hazel, or my daughter Hazel also called Lenny, Uncle Lenny. He actually, of all the people she ever met, other than her grandparents, she took to Lenny. She's never taken to anybody else. I think he met her where she was at, even though she was 3. I think all of my At Voices family in particular, just to let you know, I've been thinking about you a lot. I know this is especially hard for that part of Lenny's family. My parents and loved Lenny. My sister loved Lenny. Lenny loved my sister a little bit too much. For those of you who ever knew, he had this massive crush on my little sister, and every time I would mention her boyfriend or whatnot, he would just interrupt me instantly and said, I don't like the way he treats her. So my sister went off. She went to Kohm. She ended up actually buying a house on this very funky bohemian little beach that Lenny had first told her about. And he went and visited her there a couple years ago. And she's married now to this amazing guy named Jack, who's this outdoor adventurer. So Jack and Lenny are talking, and they're chit-chatting about this and this and that. And they realize that Jack, my sister's husband, who doesn't come from an environmental background at all, he's a nurse, he had met Lenny on the Porcupine River 20 years ago, before I knew Lenny, before Thana and I knew each other, definitely before my sister knew this. My sister's new husband had met Lenny on the Porcupine River. And I feel like that's the perfect epitome of Lenny. He was everywhere. Who knows how many people are out there that have had these little encounters with Lenny? There's thousands and thousands of them. And at the same time, there's this much smaller group of us here. And I'm just going to close with this. That I've been thinking of as a tribe. And it's the tribe of people who were personally influenced by Lenny. And I am very sad that nobody else is going to join that tribe. But they aren't, right? They're not. We're the last members of this tribe of people who had this blessing of being mentored and loved and influenced by Lenny. And so I think as our tribute to him, I cannot think of anything more we could do than to share everything he taught us with the rest of the world. To fight for the things he fought for, to fight for ending mountaintop removal, and fight for the Arctic, and fight for people who are suffering from injustice. To do it in a good way, and to also enjoy one another and enjoy life, and go to Jamaica and take your vacations and go outside and be with each other. I think we all aspire to do it in a good way. We all aspire to spend time with each other. We all aspire to embody everything Lenny taught us. And maybe some days we do it, some days we don't. Nobody's perfect, and that includes Lenny. But we are out there now as the people who can carry forward his work in the world. And the second best time is now. Thank you.
I'm JW, and I worked with Lenny from about 2004 to about 2011. I am the husband of Lenny's doctor and the father of 2 of Uncle Lenny's favorite nieces. Make friends. Never lie. Listen. Don't lobby without a hangover. It sounds counterintuitive, but I think that Lenny really enjoyed being still. And I think being still was a thing that was very sacred to Lenny. And I think the profession and the personal life that he chose meant that the comfort of being sedentary was something he denied himself at every opportunity. And when Lenny did move on someone else's behalf, I think of it as being effective and quick and efficient. Even Lenny's feet were fast, and he never failed to remind us that as a young man, he was an excellent track runner and excelled at American rules football. They never saw me coming, he'd say. They're individuals who teach things, and they're teachers. They don't quit at 5 o'clock or when they leave the confines of their school or office. It's a big life and it's a big world, and that all becomes their classroom. And to me, Lenny was that kind of teacher. Whether he was in the office or at the Firefly or on the Northern Slope, he never left his desk because his business was people. There are those who organize people, and there are organizers. Being a capital O organizer, Lenny never stopped working to bring people together for peace and for justice, no matter the personal cost. As many of you know, and as others have talked about tonight, Lenny toured the country in old beat-up cars, hauling around the slide projector to anybody who would listen. And that sounds hyperbolic, but after a certain amount of time working at Appalachian Voices, Lenny expected you to go out on the road and do what he had done and stir the pot and talk to people and do these slideshows. And my first such tour was across Missouri and Illinois. And I drove 12 hours to talk to 4 people at a Unitarian church. And afterwards I called Lenny because I was really disappointed. I said, Lenny, I'm really bummed. I know I shouldn't complain, and you've done this, and man, this is hard. He goes, hey, listen here. My record is 26 hours across the Arizona desert to talk to no people. Now keep going, start to prepare for your next presentation, and whether there's 1 person there or 1,000 people there or 0 people there, do the work that it's going to take for us to win. When I went to work on Capitol Hill, Lenny and I have spoke almost every day for about 3 years. And when I went, I said, what's it going to be like? And Lenny said, well, get 2 of your best friends together. Give one of them a football and give the other one a baseball bat. And go long and have your friend throw you the football. As you're making your run, right as that ball lands in your hands and you make the catch, have the other friend smack you in the face with a baseball bat. And he said, if you can handle it, you're ready to be either an NFL receiver or a member of the people empowerment business. Most of us chose the latter. He became just not just a dear friend and colleague, but family. And when my wife and I found out we were going to be having a little girl, I called and I said, Lenny, you're going to be a grandpa again. He scoffed and scolded me and said, let's just say that I'm an uncle. I never saw him happier than when he was talking about his family, his daughters, or spending time with my young kids. Like Marianne said, he'd get down on his knee, and it was the only time ever, knowing Lenny, that I saw him let his guard down completely, with not a care in the world. And if you ever got to watch Lenny play with children, it was a very special experience. And even in that way, I think Lenny had a powerful lesson to teach us about how we treat the youths of our species, as he would say. Lenny was both eternally young and eternally old, occupying a strange territory where he could tear apart a cocky college kid with a swift and thunderous wit, but then pick you up off the floor with a piece of advice showing that his age was more like 3,000, or since he liked to use memorable numbers, 3007. All his life, Lenny remained spry and energetic, his hands beautifully weathered and useful. When I imagine his face, it is taut, his brows furrowed, and his lips are pursed in consternation at the latest behavior of an overzealous right-wing talking head, thinking of a way to outsmart and outwork our opposition. You could watch his wheels start to turn, and you could see the energy and the power of who Lenny was starting to happen behind his eyes. He'd share a quick bit of wisdom that I wouldn't fully understand for 2 more years. Tell me a quick story of some phenomenal thing he'd done that I would never hear him repeat. And then he'd crack a quick joke, probably at my expense. His tension melts, and I see his quick laugh and a generous smile that to me became ubiquitous with spending time with Lenny, especially in Todd. I'll always remember Lenny's laugh, which we were all fortunate to hear so many times. Lenny was always the first. He was the first person to tell you that he wasn't the first chief, that he wasn't the first Lenny, that there were others like him before. And Lenny always talked about carrying a light. And he took up that responsibility like no other person that I've ever known. Cesar Chavez carried the light. The fight is never about grapes or lettuce. It's always about people. Talk is cheap is the way we organize and use our lives every day that tells what we believe in. That light was carried by Lenny's friend, the late Senator Paul Wellstone. Politics is about improving people's lives, lessening human suffering, and advancing the cause of peace and justice in our country and around the world. Never separate the life you live from the words you speak. That light was carried by our friend, our brother, our chief, my hero, Lenny Kohm. And I think his life was an all too brief wish that we carry it too. Thank you.
Lenny and I had a lot of inside jokes from being on the road. And there was a guy that came down from Northwest Territories during Wilderness Week, and he was talking about how there was a non-Native woman that came to their community and was working and convinced them to let her drive the boat. So he said, we're going along, and there's the water, and she lets it full out. Next thing, they're out up on the bank, and there's grass going by and sticks, and so we had some really interesting adventures together, and then we'd start out, after something would happen. Next thing, but since I'm coming and as a representative of the Gwich'in Nation, I have to do some stuff. And I don't know what happened with Chief Linklater. Hopefully he'll make it later on. It's not easy getting down from a small village in the subarctic. So first, thank the Creator for letting us be here. Thank the ancestors for letting us use this land. Thank the four-legged and the flying. And thank you for everyone being here. I bring this from the Gwich'in Nation. All of our hearts are heavy for our brother, our uncle, our grandpa. I consider him my older little brother. And I went to Wilderness Week once upon a time and met Lenny, and we kind of hit it off. You know, he had such a great sense of humor. And next thing, I was on the road with him. And that was for about 2 years off and on. And this was when he had to lug these two big things around, you know, off and on airports and in and out of little tiny rental cars. And I remember there was this one person that would arrange the trips and tell us where we were going to go and everything. And there was like, you know, one day we had to drive at, 4 or 5 in the morning across Arkansas to Tennessee or someplace. And then she said, it'll be fun. So, so that was another one of our things. It'll be fun. And for the most part, it was, any road trip where you're with somebody for too long, you want to hit each other in the head with a brick, you know. But There was the late Peter Solomon was telling me there's a legend that the Gwich'in have that there would come a time when the people would need help, and there would be a really small man that would come and help them. That would come and help us. A really short man would come and help us. And you know, the time I got involved was the real hairy, scary years back when Al Gore was elected. Kind of. And that, you know, that was, the work never let up then. The work never let up. But I think the connection that Lenny had with us in the North was that when he came up, he saw us as part of the landscape. You know, there was went on a trip one time with someone to one of our villages and came back, and all the photos he had, there was no people in it. You know, and I was like, how do you do that? You know, you go to one of our villages and you don't have one picture of one person. You know, but he saw. He had a way of really seeing the whole picture. And he had a way also, I guess maybe because he was a drummer, he knew how to listen, how to really listen. He wasn't always trying to talk. Silence was okay, which is what part of our deal is too, is silence is okay. When I first went to D.C., I was just amazed that no one ever took a breath. You couldn't get a word in edgewise, and I'm like trying to be, you know, like, you know, where I come from, it's polite and you wait, and I'd be waiting forever. Finally, I just started, you know, plowing my way through too, but if it wasn't for Lenny, I really think there'd be drilling in the Arctic Refuge right now. He did. He had basic common sense of how to do things, how to sit down and talk to people, like people, one-on-one kind of deal. And when he had, you know, which, you know, it seems kind of brilliant that he would bring us on the road, you know, letting us be our own spokespeople. He never told us what to say. There was one time where, you know, I was talking and stuff, and he just said, you said this, and then you kind of let it roll off the table. You know, like, keep it going, give it the hit at the end, you know. That was the only time he ever said anything. But he understood his own, who he was as a person, he understood. And obviously, he had been taught the history of his people, and he knew the importance of the sacred and where the place was in the world, and of course, knowing to be severely outnumbered in a situation, but how to be victorious in the end. He's always going to have a special place for us in our heart. The two rules that the elders gave us when we decided to oppose, as a nation, to oppose drilling in the Arctic Refuge was to speak from the heart and do it in a good way. And you know, when you're a drummer and you're part of a band, it's the beat of the drummer that people dance to. And he knew how to make people dance in a good way. And if we were in one of our communities, we'd be bringing out all of our delicacies: caribou, salmon, moose, berries, blueberries, cranberries, bannock, fry bread, all of that we'd be having in his honor. And truly, he holds a place of honor for us. And there would be a song that the people would sing.
Nenatashi, 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 ete gochu, Nenatashi, Nenatashi, juk juk. Vedidavju, 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 ede gochu, Vedidavju, Vedidavju, juk juk. Vedijanjo, 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 ede gochu, Vedijanjo, Vedijanjo, juk juk. Hallelujah, 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 ede gochu, hallelujah, hallelujah, juk juk. Nenaharya, 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 juk juk, ete Nenaharya, Nenaharya, Lenny. Amen. I just added that.
In our word, we don't have any word for goodbye. It's we'll see you again in Nahalia, Lenny. And he, him being persnickety about music, I wanted to, with no words, honor him. He always didn't like, does it have words, he would say, if there was music. That's one of the times I wanted to hit him in the head with the brick in the car. Because it was pretty much jazz 24/7. But this is, where the drum for us represents the heartbeat. And let the heartbeat continue. Masicho Shalaknai.
I'll make this brief. My name is Benji Burrell. I worked with Lenny for quite a few years and had the pleasure of living with him for a bit, which you all know how much fun that was, I'm sure. But Jake Kralik from Montana wanted me to just say how much he appreciated knowing and loving Lenny, and wanted me to give everybody his best and thank everybody for gathering here. But I wanted to share one thing that Lenny told me, and it's one of those things that he never told people very often, the same story. And he told me he was a cheerleader in high school. And he would do like the pom-pom, he would do the moves. And then there was a cheer that he said, give him the axe, give him the axe, give him the axe. Where? Right in the neck, right in the neck, right in the neck, there. But what Lenny would really want us all to do is not really celebrate him so much as celebrate what's good in the world, you know? Go out and find something that you care about. Find the thing that's in you that you care about, that you really think needs help, and go and do something about it. You know, Lenny always said, make the ask. If you're going to talk to somebody, make the ask. So there you go. I made the ask. Go do something good in the world on his behalf, on your behalf, and on the behalf of all the people and the creatures that live around us. So thanks, Lenny.
Hi, my name's Melanie Griffin, and I worked for the Sierra Club for many years and was head of the Public Lands Program, and Lenny worked for me. That was a joke. And any of you that Lenny worked for will know how funny that was. I needed to have these weekly phone calls with him about his progress and what was going on, you know, what was going on in the field. And well, they didn't need to be phone calls, but he was supposed to write something up. And as somebody else mentioned, that was pretty hard to do. So we just have a chat on the phone, and I would tell him what was going on in D.C., and he would tell me what he was going to do. And I would say, okay. And that's how I supervised him. Because he was brilliant. But the one thing, the make the ask just reminded me that he was always on a shoestring budget, as Harvard said, and it was, you know, from group to group. The Wilderness Society would support him for 2 months, and then the Sierra Club would support him for 2 months, whatever. And he was always putting those things together, you know, and I don't know how many times I said to him, Lenny, I'm really sorry, can't do it. You know, we're out. I cannot support the slideshow this month or quarter or whatever. And he would say, who do I need to talk to? And I'd give him a board member name or a CEO name or a field rep name or wherever the problem was. And I don't know how many times he did that, but he did what needed to be done. And it was just amazing to watch him work in all kinds of different venues, you know, at different levels, with members of Congress to, you know, the kids crawling on the ground. And I really miss him. And the thing that I love the most about Lenny, other than the fact that he really loved people, the way he would look at you, you know, he loved you. And but he was humble. He was incredibly humble, and that's pretty rare. So I hope we can carry that with us also.
I'm one of the Jamaican contingent. I met him about 5 years ago as the last part of his 70th birthday party, and there's a lot of time we spent together. Every time he was down there, I made it down there. Looking forward to the next birthday this November. But the one thing I remember, we were sitting around when I first met him, and I'm an environmentalist, I thought, and it's very strong, and he was spouting off about all these different facts, figures, how things were going about oil, coal, whatever, and I started challenging him. And I was just like, well, let's see if this guy is real. You know, kind of a blowhard. He talked. But I finally challenged him, and he basically leaned across the table. I wish I still had my hat on. Just take his, it's like, let me explain some things to you.
Well, I sort of feel compelled to confess you have one bureaucrat in your midst here. I'm Jim Kurth. I'm the chief of the National Wildlife Refuge System, your National Wildlife Refuge System, but I used to make an honest living, and I met Lenny shortly after I became the manager of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and I actually met him the same day I met Brooks Yeagers, the young Alaska Wilderness League in late 94, early 95, when the 104th Congress got together, planned this big event in Washington to start to rally the troops to fight against oil drilling, and I somehow, without telling my bosses, got on the agenda only to find out speaking right before me was Brooks Yeager, and right after me was Norma Cassie, and I was just terrified. And I don't remember anything else other than ending up in the bar with Lenny that night. You know. And he would come and he stayed with my wife Tricia and I when he was in Fairbanks on a number of occasions, and it was so important to have people like Lenny, because those of us that, you know, care about these wild places that make our living in public service can't do the things that you activists can do. We have to work for whoever the people of this country elect. But Lenny taught me that you can still speak from the heart, and you can still tell stories that help people how to understand why these things are important. And it's been an inspiration in my life, and maybe we'll tell some better stories around the fire. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I would put out a call because I'm sure there's more people who have things they would like to say, but we do have a very generously donated dinner tonight and some other things. So I guess we should just keep moving along. But thanks to everyone who shared, and I hope that others who have things to share will avail themselves of the opportunity around the campfire. But now is the time where we're actually going to hear from the man himself. Well, I'm on the agenda as having the closing remarks, but I'm actually going to turn the closing remarks over to, thanks to Jerry Cantwell, we have Lenny's answering machine, and many of you will remember this.
Hi, this is Lenny. You know what this is, and you know what to do. Wait for the beep.